もしやコスモでは。
Cosmo makes me free.
Cosmo AP Luxury Sports.
Now that I have a knob to twiddle, back to the speedometer, which of course needs odometers. And that's why I have these LCD screens. Perfect. So the trip odometer will consist of a screen vertically, the larger main odometer will need a horizontal screen. I'll have to trim off these little nubbins. Allow me to get some sharper razor blades. Cool. Needed to cut a little bit of clearance to fit past the motor. And don't worry, the area that I milled away was just part of the ground plane, no layers inside the board. Should be as simple as drilling some mounting holes right here. Just a little clearance for the bolt is needed. Supporting the other side of the screen is going to be pretty straightforward because this piece of aluminum is exactly the right thickness. So I'll just make a few marks. Then over to the mill. God, I wish the markings on this mill were in proper metric. 6 millimeters. And mark the position of the bolts. Have I mentioned how infuriating this tiny hardware is to work with? Cool. Mounting the second screen is going to be almost the same, except in order to fill the odometer opening, it has to be perpendicular to the first screen, which means got to make a little clearance. Now, during the real final assembly, because some of these screws are hidden, this screen will have to be attached to the aluminum carrier before the carrier is attached to the main body of the gauge. But I didn't do that right now because I didn't feel like reaching in here with some pliers, gripping these tiny nuts. I hate gripping tiny nuts. Awesome. Well, the fuel and coolant gauges are a set of heavily damped, counterweighted galvanic gauges. Quite elegant. Thankfully, these needles pop right off. These two warning lights just seem to be held in by the friction of the circuit boards. They're now rattling around in here. Let's get these out of the way. Well, I've stared at these, and there doesn't seem to be a reasonable way for me to modify these to mount a stepper motor. So, we're going to have to do it from scratch. Okay. So, about 77 millimeters, and actually that seems to be about the right size. And then what we'll do is... and from the bottom to the bottom of the gauge face, we are 22 millimeters. You may have noticed the block of aluminum magically changed to one that I didn't have to machine so much off of. I've measured this gauge face, and it turns out that thankfully these 4 holes are evenly spaced and symmetrical and at right angles to this bottom face here. So that's how I will line things up. We need just a little bit of clearance for the contour right there. Took a little bit of filing and tweaking. However, it now fits within the cluster. Just use the gauge face to line everything up. And the marks on the bottom for the location of the mounting holes. I am only going to use 2 mounting holes because honestly the stock one had 6, which seems incredibly excessive. Wearing out. Tapping these holes out to M4 in this thick metal is going to take damn near forever. I wish I had the balls to just chuck it in the mill and ram it home. Then again, I have found with experience that tapping thick holes is best done slowly. I think that might be the deepest hole I've ever done tapped. Excellent. Looks like that fits as it should. Now to mount the motors. The movement shaft seems to be centered between the gauge face mounting holes, which is going to make it very easy to locate the new motor. There's no space to use steppers that have mounting holes, and these don't have any, so they are going to need to mount directly to the printed circuit board, which will control them. Going to use the mounting holes of the gauge face as a starting point. 31 millimeters, 58 millimeters. Now that defines the area of the gauge face, and I've kind of cheated and I already made the pattern for the motors. So we'll just pop that onto the gauge face and rotate it around until it fits. Oops, out the whole thing again. Zoom in a bit. And we know that the center point of the shaft goes right on the center point of the mounting holes. We'll just move that until it's even. Do the same on the other side. Rotate, rotate, rotate. We will need mounting holes for the board. So we're adding some here, and I already know the mounting hole is 3 millimeters, and we'll just make the thing a little bit thicker. There we are. So these represent the mounting holes of the gauge face itself. And now we just have to add mounting holes for the board. So we'll just make another copy of that and place it in, oops, that's not quite lined up, there we go. Place it in line with the mounting edge of the face, making sure to leave enough clearance. Go. And that should be the board pattern to mount the motors. Perfect. Now I did not add any more traces to the board pattern only because I have to add more components to the board a bit later. So there's no point doing that. For now I'm just going to cut it out and make a small aluminum stand-in to represent the board. Then once it's finalized, I'll be able to etch it for real. Okay, just mark 2 millimeters below each hole. Because I'm going to end up milling most of this material away so that only 4 pillars remain to support the gauge space. And I like having really clear lines to tell me what I'm intending to mill away. Now, using the highly calibrated eyeball, just going to decide where I have to cut to fit the motor and leave enough shaft that I can trim if necessary. The last thing we want is a short shaft. Of course, that's what she said. Kind of had to shim this up a little bit. Exactly 1 centimeter. I'll just mark 1 centimeter to create a step onto which the board will sit. Oh, well, it doesn't fit, but I kind of expected it not to fit. So what I'll do is I'll just add a little depression for the ear of the motor to sit into. Just a little bit. Alrighty, we can put this thing together finally. Once again, really tiny hardware. Okay, I had to stop this. You see this socket right here? That just fell off the bench and bounced from the ground, landing perfectly at the edge of the 2x4. Million to one shot, Doc. Million to one shot. Plenty of adjustment so that the gauge face can be centered. And the gauge face itself. Now I am going to need to get some longer screws. And if I'm lucky, the bezel still fits. Yes, it does. Well, only one gauge left, and it's not even really a real gauge. It's a stupid fake pseudo gauge for the generator and oil, which is just two warning lights in a little plastic housing that I've obviously already removed. Now, to unuseless this hole, I've always known that I wanted to put a screen behind it so I can basically display anything I want. Now, try as I might, I have been unable to find any circular LCD screens, which means using a regular rectangular screen. And the trick, of course, is to find one that will fit within the available space and also fully cover the circular opening. Obviously this one isn't it. It took a lot of searching, and I practically had to overnight parts from Japan, well, China. But I found that the 3.5-inch screen will fit perfectly in the available space. It's basically 1 millimeter too small, which is acceptable, and it looks like I'll be able to fit it within the cluster housing. Now the next size up, a 4.5-inch screen, completely fills the available space. However, there is just absolutely no way I'll be able to jam 4.5 inches into this area. Naturally, that's what she said. Oh wait, no she didn't. Now it looks like all I have to do is create some clearance by grinding this away and remove these bezel mounting holes. And I think the best way to do this is to create kind of a C-shaped bracket that can bolt to both sides of the cluster. And of course, that starts with a block of aluminum. We'll call that 65 millimeters. And to make things easy, let's say 1 centimeter wide. could do some math to center this up, but it's probably just easier to measure it. Now that should slip right in here. Oh, there we go. Now just a matter of adjusting it until the display doesn't present much of a gap between it and the bezel, which is about here. Then just a little bit of glue to hold it in place temporarily. That's not bad at all. Now these things are kind of at a funny angle, and I will likely spend more time trying to figure out where to drill it by measurement than to just go for it by eye. I drilled a small hole so that if it doesn't line up, I can always adjust. Oh, this might actually just pop right out. Yep, it did. Okay, this hole's perfect. This one, way too high. So I'm gonna guess again and drill one right here. Tap this out to M4. Gonna do the hole on one side, make sure everything lines up, then do the hole on the other side. Is that possibly what she said? Wow, it actually lines up. Now if I can just match the little mark I made before, there it is. Maybe I should have measured it. going to give it a little bit of an elongation to the right. Moment of truth. Now that side still fits. Ooh, looks like we're close. Excellent. Have to make a bracket to hold this side of the screen, of course, so I can just reuse the numbers from before. 65 millimeters by 10 millimeters. And each pedestal about 12 millimeters. And let's say the base will be, I don't know, 5 millimeters high. This, I think I can just eyeball, center it between the two supports, and mark. Now it's going to take a little bit of fitting to make this match the curve, and I can't really think of a more elegant way of doing this other than just tracing it out. Then cutting it. Turns out a 3-inch hole saw is the exact curvature I need to cut that notch. Set that to low. Really well. Okay, that fits reasonably well. And the best part about using a 3-inch hole saw is that I can just use a piece of 3-inch tube, which also perfectly matches the contour of the cluster housing. Actually going to hold this together enough so that I can weld it. Will likely involve the glue gun, Because as luck would have it, I can never find my aluminum magnet. Should probably clamp that in place a little bit. Turn to the good old glue gun to put this bracket in place temporarily. I just want to make it all one big blob so that I can peel it off easily. Now the trick is going to be welding that quickly enough so the glue doesn't melt. Close enough. Still fits. Well, I cleaned my tungsten and then jigged this thing up with some vice grips and shims to hopefully prevent it from moving. A little bit of contamination in that weld from remnants of the glue, but let's face it, it's not like it's holding up the world. Hey, it still fits. Is there ever any doubt? And we'll just mark this so I can trim it. And finally, mounting holes. Let's put one right there, and then I'll mirror it on the other side. Well, this is slightly awkward to drill. Nothing to do now but put it together. Looks like everything still lines up. Cool. Give these a snug. And that right there is how you mount a 3.5-inch Nextion touchscreen into the instrument cluster of a 70s Mazda. Well, you know what that means, don't you? That means that I am done with the fabrication component of converting this instrument cluster to electronic. And there's where we're ending episode 48. Well, you can probably guess what might be happening in episode 49. Yep, that's right. All of the electronics to make that gauge cluster actually work.